Some people don't go quiet because they have nothing to say. They go quiet because the last time they opened up, it cost them something. Maybe you've seen that kind of silence before, the kind that appears after too many conversations where someone tried to explain themselves, only to walk away feeling even more misunderstood. The kind where a person slowly stops correcting people, stops arguing, stops trying to be fully seen, not because they stopped caring, because they got tired of explaining, tired of defending feelings that should have been obvious, tired of hearing, "You're overthinking it," or worse, silence. And after enough of those moments, something changes. The nervous system starts learning a dangerous little equation. Being honest means getting hurt. So the person adapts, not dramatically, not consciously, quietly. From the outside, it can look like distance, like emotional withdrawal, like indifference. But underneath it, something very different is happening. This silence isn't empty, it's protective. In psychology, this pattern is often described as emotional withdrawal, a survival response where someone pulls inward to protect themselves from emotional harm. At some point in their life, openness stopped leading to connection. Instead, it led to confusion, conflict, dismissal. Words got twisted, feelings got minimized, vulnerability started feeling dangerous instead of healing, and eventually, their system learned something that felt safer. Staying quiet hurts less than being misunderstood, so silence became a strategy, a practical one, a way to avoid emotional collisions, a way to stay regulated in environments that no longer felt emotionally safe, a way to preserve dignity when honesty seemed to invite punishment instead of understanding. This is where most people get it wrong. They assume silence means there's no emotion underneath it, no care, no depth. But in reality, silence often means memory. The body remembering exactly what happened the last time it tried to open up. Because silence isn't weakness, and it isn't coldness. It's intelligence learned under pressure, a nervous system choosing containment over exposure, protection over explanation. In this video, we're going to explore the hidden psychology of people who emotionally withdraw, not because they want to disappear, but because at some point, disappearing emotionally felt safer than staying exposed. And the real question isn't, why do some people go quiet? The real question is, what did they learn would happen if they didn't? Because once you understand that, silence stops looking like distance and starts looking like survival. Silence was never the first choice. No one is born believing their feelings are inconvenient. No one enters the world thinking their voice doesn't matter. That belief gets learned slowly, quietly, usually through moments that don't even look dramatic from the outside. You explain that something hurt you, and someone immediately gets defensive. You try to describe confusion and get brushed aside. You finally speak honestly, and instead of curiosity, you're met with correction, dismissal, irritation. After enough of those experiences, the mind starts making adjustments, not because the person is weak, because the person is adapting. If every attempt at honesty creates tension, misunderstanding, rejection, then silence starts feeling safer than expression. And over time, that pattern hardens. This is how emotional withdrawal forms, not as avoidance, as adaptation. It often begins early, in families where emotions were treated like inconveniences, in relationships where being easy to deal with mattered more than being emotionally honest, in environments where keeping the peace was rewarded more than telling the truth. And the lesson usually isn't taught directly. Nobody says, "Your feelings don't matter." The lesson gets taught through outcomes, through facial expressions, tone changes, heavy sighs, awkward silence after vulnerability. Little moments that quietly tell the nervous system, this is not safe. And once that lesson settles into the body, silence no longer feels like suppression. It feels like control, like stability, like the least painful option available. What looks like withdrawal later in life is often just the echo of a moment long ago, when being open didn't bring closeness, only exposure. And quiet became the only place that still felt emotionally survivable. In psychology, emotional withdrawal isn't about lacking feelings. In fact, most emotionally withdrawn people feel too much. That's the part people rarely understand. From the outside, they may seem calm, detached, hard to read. But internally, their mind is loud, constantly replaying conversations, reanalyzing tone, revisiting tiny moments from hours ago. Did I sound weird? Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Why did the room feel different after I spoke? Their emotional world is active, layered, and exhausting. They don't avoid feelings. They carry them alone. Inside, entire conversations are happening that never make it out loud. Explanations are being rehearsed. Emotions are being organized. Memories are being reprocessed over and over again. Because understanding your feelings internally is one thing. Expressing them safely is another. And for someone whose nervous system associates vulnerability with danger, expression can feel physically unsafe. That's why telling someone to just open up rarely works. Withdrawal isn't stubbornness. It's protection wrapped around sensitivity. A structure built slowly over years of learning that closeness without safety hurts more than distance ever could. For many quiet people, silence isn't even a conscious decision anymore. It's biological. When psychologists talk about survival responses, most people think of fight or flight. But there's another response that's far more misunderstood. Freeze. Freeze happens when the nervous system detects danger, but doesn't believe fighting or escaping will help. So instead, everything moves inward. The body becomes still. Speech becomes difficult. Energy collapses internally. And suddenly, a person who knows exactly what they feel can't get the words out. You've probably felt this before. You rehearse everything perfectly in your head. Then the moment comes. Someone asks, "What's wrong?" And your throat tightens. Your mind blanks. You say, "I'm fine." Even when you're not because you're lying, because your body no longer feels safe enough to translate emotion into speech. That isn't immaturity. It isn't weakness. It's a nervous system prioritizing survival over expression. In freeze, silence reduces risk. Risk of escalation, risk of conflict, risk of emotional exposure repeating itself again. And here's what makes this so confusing. The nervous system can learn freeze responses in ordinary relational environments, not just traumatic emergencies, chronic misunderstanding, emotional unpredictability, repeated dismissal, constant invalidation. Over time, communication itself starts feeling threatening. So when silence appears, it isn't disinterest, it's regulation. A body remembering what honesty cost last time and choosing quiet before history repeats itself. And maybe the saddest part is this. Most people never realize how lonely it is to have a loud inner world and no safe place to put it. Because silence protects you from conflict, but it also protects you from connection. That's the paradox. When someone stays quiet, they avoid arguments, misinterpretation, emotional exhaustion, but they also slowly become unseen. And at first, that trade feels worth it. Being invisible hurts less than being misrepresented. At least invisibility is quiet. It doesn't erupt. It doesn't humiliate you. It doesn't leave you replaying conversations at 2 a.m. wondering why nobody understood what you meant. So the person adapts again. They become easier to read superficially, while becoming harder to truly know. Conversations stay surface level. Needs go unspoken. Resentment turns inward because there's nowhere else for it to go. And eventually, people start saying things like, "You're so hard to read. You never talk about your feelings. You seem distant lately, without realizing that distance was never the goal. Safety was. One of the most misunderstood things about emotionally withdrawn people is how inconsistent they can seem. Some days they're warm, funny, engaged, completely present. Other days they disappear emotionally. Replies get shorter. Energy changes. Their silence returns. And to others this can look manipulative, cold, confusing. But internally, there's usually nothing random about it. This isn't moodiness. It's capacity. For someone who regulates through withdrawal, social openness requires enormous emotional energy. Staying expressive means staying exposed, and exposure is exhausting when your nervous system is constantly scanning for emotional danger. So on good days, they can connect deeply. They can laugh, open up, be fully present. But afterward, their system crashes inward again. Not because the interaction was fake, because maintaining openness for too long becomes overwhelming. This is why emotionally withdrawn people often confuse others. Their warmth was real, and their silence is real too. Both are authentic. They aren't pulling away because they don't care. They pull away because caring deeply costs them more energy than most people realize. And without understanding that rhythm, people only see the withdrawal, not the exhaustion underneath it. What protects you at first doesn't always protect you forever. Eventually, silence starts changing shape. What once felt like safety slowly becomes isolation. At first, the consequences are subtle. You feel regulated, controlled, emotionally contained. There are fewer fights, fewer painful conversations, fewer moments where you leave interactions feeling exposed and misunderstood. Quiet feels manageable, clean, predictable. But over time, the costs accumulate. Connection gets thinner. People know pieces of you, but never the full version. And a strange kind of loneliness begins settling in. Not because nobody is around you, because nobody fully reaches you. That's the hidden cost of emotional withdrawal. The walls that protect you from pain also block intimacy. And eventually, expression itself starts feeling foreign. Even when safe people appear, your nervous system doesn't automatically recognize safety. It recognizes habit. Silence becomes automatic, reflexive, like muscle memory. And this is how survival strategies quietly outlive the danger they were created for. The person is no longer just protected. They're trapped. Not dramatically, quietly. Healing begins when that pattern is finally understood with compassion instead of judgment. And healing doesn't start by forcing yourself to suddenly become louder. That usually makes things worse, because silence was never the real problem. Unsafety was. What needs to change isn't your personality. It's your relationship with expression. Healing starts when words stop being punished, when vulnerability is met with curiosity instead of correction, when someone listens without immediately defending themselves, when pauses are allowed to exist without pressure. And safety rarely arrives all at once. It appears in tiny moments. A calm response, a soft tone, someone asking, "Can you tell me more?" And actually waiting for the answer. Little by little, the nervous system starts updating its expectations. Maybe expression no longer equals danger. Maybe honesty doesn't always end in rejection. Maybe being seen won't destroy me this time. And slowly, silence changes. It stops being a reflex and becomes a choice. You begin noticing the difference between being quiet because you genuinely want peace and being quiet because fear is holding your voice hostage. That awareness matters, because healing isn't about becoming emotionally exposed all the time. It's about finally having the freedom to choose. And when safety becomes real enough, words usually return naturally, not forced, not rehearsed, not dragged out through pressure, just finally safe enough to land. If you recognized yourself somewhere in this, in the silence, the withdrawal, the constant carefulness around your emotions, there's something important you need to hear. You are not broken. You adapted. What looks like distance today is often the residue of intelligence under pressure. A system that learned how to survive when connection stopped feeling safe. And survival is never something to be ashamed of. This isn't an invitation to suddenly explain everything you've ever felt. It's simply a reminder that you are not the only person who learned to become quiet in order to protect themselves. And sometimes healing begins there, not with speaking, but with finally feeling understood, without having to fight for it. If this resonated with you, I'd really like to hear your experience in the comments. You don't have to explain everything. Honestly, even one sentence is enough, because connection doesn't always begin with words. Sometimes it begins with the realization that you were never the only one silently trying to survive.